Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look at ways that we can come together and we can help each other as we try to minister effectively for the Lord. Today we have with us attorney David Gibbs III. He is the leader of the National Center for Life and Liberty. Many of you already know him and have actually received help from him from time to time. And we were talking today about how it might be a good idea just to record one of our conversations so that other folks could look at it, other folks could hear it, and they could kind of examine some of the things we're talking about. And it would be a way to give advice or give information to a large group of people at once. So, hey, thank you, Attorney Gibbs, for stopping by and giving us the chance to record this today.
Well, Dr. Moody, it's always my pleasure to spend some time with you. And I guess we're down to the essential employees because we're hitting our own buttons and running our thing. And so we're in some unprecedented waters in the United States of America.
We are. So folks that are watching, please give us some grace. We are not multimedia guys here. Jonathan's been a good help to us. Ryan is at a distance, so we're doing the best we can. But first, let's just start out. I know initially a lot of churches were concerned about to meet or not and talking about they had the right to meet. And I know you gave a lot of information about that.
Yes, sir.
Where do you feel like we are at this point in that particular process?
Well, we're watching two things happen, Dr. Moody. Number one, we are continuing to see gathering limitations where they are in different jurisdictions saying we do not want people to gather in groups of more than 10 or more than 50, more than 100. And in different regions, it's complicated because we now have some states that have said, you know, here's the state standard, but then localities, cities and counties are reducing the numbers. And some of them have even gone so far as to threaten criminal charges if you meet in violation of those numbers. So we have the gathering limitation challenge. But now we're watching across the nation these stay-at-home mandates. Now, that's a little bit of a different dynamic. That's putting the burden now on the person that's going out of their home. So I received a call from a pastor in Texas who felt like they could meet within the group limitations, but then the stay-at-home mandate came down and their jurisdiction put an order on all of the people to stay home. And he said, would the church be the only person to be in trouble, or could the individual church attenders get criminally charged? And under a lot of these stay-at-home mandates, they're putting it not on the place where the person is going, in this case, the church, but the individual person would be the one that could potentially be in trouble. And so it's a very, very complicated dynamic all across the country. And I know for many of our Free Will Baptist churches, it's a struggle right now because we're not able to do something we've always enjoyed, gathering, going to our buildings, enjoying the fellowship, the worship, the preaching, the opportunity to have invitations and things that have, constituted church for so many across the nation. And we're in this unusual moment, and a lot of people are kind of wrestling through, how do we respond? And what we've been stressing at the National Center for Life and Liberty is really kind of three things you need to think about. Number one, what is the law in your area? And our team's available to any church that's wondering. There's a lot of web access. You can go to our NCLL site and get information, but you need to know what the mandates are in your region. Then number two, you have to evaluate what's effective for your church. Churches of 1,000 with a television ministry, it's a lot easier to go online than a smaller church that doesn't have a camera. And so you have to evaluate what options really are on the table for your ministry. And then number three, and I know you've done an excellent job with this for the denomination and the leaders, but what are the optics? What are our testimony? How do we as Free Will Baptist leaders want to be known across the nation? Do we want to help support and get behind beating this virus? And we certainly understand there's a certain degree of nobility and looking out for your fellow man. And we're not saying the doctors are all right or the government's getting it all right. But as church leaders, we have to examine our testimony. What are the optics and the actions we decide to take?
Excellent. So that's really good things for us to take and consider. And you mentioned some of what we've told folks. We've really encouraged them to do your best to be a helper to your community, to your government leaders, and think about the scriptures, think about Romans 13 and how it talks about we're related and how we're to really listen to our local governments. And I also encourage our folks to think about passages like 1 Corinthians chapter 9. If you really look at that passage, in 5 different places, Paul refers to rights and talks about his willingness to give up those rights. Or you could even translate the word power. In other words, I can do this or I could do that. But he says, I give that up. And he says, I give that up for the sake of the gospel. And he goes through at the end of the chapter and he talks about he does all things so that he might by all means save some. And so one of the things we're encouraging our folks to do is, hey, put yourself in the shoes of an elderly person, someone that's at risk in some other area. Put yourself in the shoes of your mayor or the law enforcement officers or the medical personnel that are really in a difficult situation, and think about, what's best for them and how you might help them. And sometimes it's that part of that sober judgment the scripture talks about. And really, it sounds like that's what you're getting at as well. I think we're all hearing part of the pressure, though, is can we survive? So we don't know how long this is going to last. You just alluded to that a bit. And so what can we do to survive financially? And we put up some of the resources that you guys put out last night under our website, under the resource section. But I thought that was very helpful. Why don't we talk about that for a bit? Some of the avenues that churches and Christian schools can take, some resources they can have perhaps from the government at this particular time.
Absolutely. And it is a very fluid dynamic between both the federal government as they're wrestling through what we're calling the coronavirus or the COVID-19 infusion of money into the economy, both for individuals and for institutions, as well as many state programs that are available for displaced workers or people that have to be temporarily furloughed. And so there are a lot of programs that are available, but I think it's important for people to realize right now, certainly Free Will Baptist leaders, that just because a church may not be meeting on Sunday, they still have bills to pay. There's still employees and buildings and things that need to be cared for. And so most churches, it's 10 to 20% that are giving 80 to 90% of the money. And I know folks are a little fearful right now, but I'm encouraging pastors and ministry leaders not to be bashful to pick up the phone and say, look, this is your church. This is our situation. We're not going to be able to have the service and the offering plate, but could you consider mailing in a check? Could you consider a credit card? Could you consider doing something online? And I know that feels awkward, but I would encourage the pastors to realize we're in this together, and asking for that help is certainly something that can be done. And then if you're in a situation, I've talked with a number of pastors that have had to lay off staff or temporarily furlough individuals, recognizing that there are a lot of programs, even if you've opted out of, for example, unemployment in various states, where the states are stepping in and still providing that benefit to employees, whether it's a school worker or daycare worker. And then, as you mentioned, many of these stimulus packages are now allowing for applications to be made. And so it may not really aim for a church only. So if you're just a local church, I'm going to say more likely than not, you're not going to be eligible for some of these. But if you have a school, a preschool, an outreach, a food bank, anything that is deemed community-oriented nonprofit, even if it's owned and controlled by your church, you may well be eligible for some of these programs. And so what we're encouraging churches to do is what we always say is, if you give good people good information, they can make good decisions. And we want to let folks know right now, we are literally answering phone calls 24/7. So if somebody says, well, I'm not part of the NCLL, or I'm not even Free Will Baptist, I don't know what the answers are, they are certainly welcome to reach out to us, and we will gladly respond. This is a crisis for not just churches that are our friends, but all of the churches across America. And one of the concerns I have, Dr. Moody, is I'm praying diligently that we don't lose many human lives, because we certainly value human life as the precious gift it is from God. But I'm also prayerful that we don't lose some ministry lives, that the individual churches and organizations. I think about, like, for example, some of our outstanding colleges there at Welch or at Southeastern or over at Randall, and these great schools that minister to young people and do such a phenomenal job in giving them ministry training and world-class education. Well, they're in a very tough spot right now because many large institutions that would not have the funding of the government are trying to decide, can we even open in the fall? And we need to recognize that right now, if a church is in a position to do so, this is a moment to step up and say, you know what, we are going to stand by our missionaries. We're going to stand by our colleges. We're going to stand by our programs. And we certainly are watching, the stock market move up and down, things happening, and people are a little unsettled. But I would strongly encourage folks to recognize none of this is catching God by surprise. We are going to weather this. So, by December of this year, this country will look back and this will be in the rearview mirror. But what we don't want is a line of casualties where a number of churches, ministries that we could have stepped up and done something to protect them and to help them. And we miss those moments. And I do encourage pastors, just because you're not having the Sunday service, and I think it's a blessing. I love our buildings. I love what we get to do. I love fellowship. I'm a handshaker. I like to meet people. But right now, that's the kind of thing that we are not able to do. But let's not be aggravated that one of our blessings, and really our buildings are blessings. I mean, you look at China, where many people believe this virus originated. I mean, those folks over there, they can't have buildings. They can't have signs. A lot of them meet in secret. I mean, they would revel in all the ministry opportunity that we have even right now. And so in some measure, what we're losing temporarily is indeed our blessing, just to be able to gather and move and enjoy these phenomenal facilities that are blessed. And so I do want folks to realize that we are still the church. The church is not the building, it's the people, it's the pastors, and that we do have the opportunity to make a difference. Now, I have had some fellows call me, and they've seen on TV, there've been some folks that have kind of taken we're going to defy the government. We have a constitution. And these are not Free Will Baptists, by the way, but these are some fellas that you'll see in the news that are making a big, God told me to meet, I'm going to meet, let them come arrest me. And they've asked, and these are good people that have said, what does the Constitution really require? And I do want everybody to understand, it's very simple to realize our rights are being violated. Our government is telling us not to meet, not to worship, not to speak. So we'll all agree that there's a violation occurring. So if you feel like your rights are being violated, they are. Okay. And we understand that. But now the question is it a justified violation? And there's two legal principles. One, the government would have to prove there's a compelling or real important reason. And we would have to kind of all agree that human life, health, welfare, safety of the people is a compelling reason. So that's kind of maybe a given. But then the second one is the government acting in the least restrictive way possible to deal with the compelling concern and not unduly infringe on the constitutional rights of the people? And that is one that's a little awkward, because you say, well, are we overreacting? Are we underreacting? What should we do? But the courts and generally case law says if the government's acting in good faith and they're treating everybody pretty much fairly, they're not saying we're going to treat Catholics different than Free Will Baptists. I mean, we're kind of looking at all of this across the spectrum. That the judgment of the government is generally given some deference. Now, at the NCAA, we're monitoring this. And obviously, as the weeks go on, if we feel like some government agencies, some local leaders are going too far, we certainly will stand with churches that want to appropriately, maybe at least argue the point. Are there some less restrictive alternatives? But right now, I would challenge everybody to realize this is a moment to pick up the phone and tell your mayor, tell your county commissioners that you're praying for them. I had one pastor, he was a little fired up and he was going to maybe hold church and defy everybody. And he called the mayor, and the mayor said, preacher, I'm never going to shut down a Baptist church. But he said, you could really help me. Could we get on the same team and could we work on this together? And that preacher actually called me back and said, what, Lord broke me over that. He said, my attitude wasn't where it needed to be. And I was defiant. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, instead of being who Jesus would want, I was being who I thought I should be. And so, realizing right now that a lot of our blessings are under some degree of attack. And we also need to recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty. I know there's fear. I mean, there's a lot of good people. I mean, even the kids right now. I mean, the athletic records that were going to be set, they don't get to be set. The graduations, there's couples that were looking forward to weddings and different
Yeah.
things, and everything is in a uncertain state. But to step forward as men and women of God and say, you know what, we want to be there for you. These are tough moments, but we're praying for you. And by the way, for the preachers, now you got a little extra time to pray, to study the word, to pick up the phone, to be online, and not frivolously online, but ministering, talking to people, being that salt and light that we're all called to be.
Yeah. Well, those are good words. And you mentioned the preachers there toward the end. I've got to say, I've been so impressed with our preachers. I think
Amazing.
we had an 85-year-old that did a podcast on Sunday, and we tried to get our team to take pictures of the pastors doing online services, and I think we ended up with about 1,000 more pictures once it was all said
Oh,
and
I
done
love it.
of people taking pictures of their pastor doing online services and doing things they'd not done before. So I do think this is really kind of an Esther Mordecai moment, for such a time as this. And so we want to encourage our folks to think about, what can I do right now in this particular situation to help, to be
Yes.
salt, to be light, to spread the gospel, and to depend upon the Lord. It's scary. You went through that a bit. We've got some resources about giving online. It's at nafwb.org. But we're also stressing, if your habit is to write a check, put it in the mail, and eventually that check will get processed. And
Yes,
so
sir.
please keep giving to your churches. I will be real honest, as I'm worried about some of our ministries, as you mentioned. And I think we really want to pray for our colleges. Pray that God will be with them. They've had to make some difficult decisions. And I would even say it's a time to pick up a phone and say, hey, Congressman, Congresswoman, you're going to probably do another round of this stimulus. How about thinking about private colleges? Our colleges do not have endowments, and they
Right.
need room and board to be able to operate. And if you're a person that gives to your college, this is the time as well, because you mentioned a little bit ago about the stock portfolios. A lot of our donors have lost resources, and it'll take a while for them to come back. So please take that and give. But there's a lot for us to think about. And Attorney Gibbs, we just thank you for what you're doing there with the NCLL, the resources you guys have put out, how you're so willing to give of yourself really 24 hours a day. And just know we're praying for you. We're asking God to continue to be with you and your team and help you. And we just thank you for helping us out with this particular time and this particular process.
Well, Dr. Moody, it's our honor to be your lawyer and to be your friend and to stand with you. And our prayer is that we will all look at this and say the Lord's done something good through these difficult moments.
Thank you, brother. God bless you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.